think there's a teacher that lives inside most of us. Here's what I mean by that. I'm not saying that everyone in the world wants to pursue a career in teaching. Obviously, this isn't the case. However, there seems to be something in us as humans that believes we have wisdom to share. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I honestly don't think I am. And here's a quick test to see if this applies to you. How many of you have ever been in a conversation where you had a hard time listening to someone because you were thinking about how you were going to respond? Or you have interrupted someone because you felt like what you had to say just couldn't wait. Again, maybe I'm the only one, but I have a feeling there's at least some of you out there that can relate to this. And if that's you, I just wondered, man, why do we do this? I know for me, as I thought about this, I think I tend to do this because I believe I have a thought that just needs to be heard. You know, like what's about to come out of my mouth may be a game changer. It may alter the way that you see things. And I think this is why avenues of communication like Twitter and Facebook, or for younger people like YouTube and TikTok, are so popular, because they increase our audience of people who can experience our brilliance, right? And I know I'm guilty of thinking this way. It's hard to deny the unquenchable craving in us as humans that just hungers to have our opinions heard. And you want to know something interesting? This is nothing new. Last session, James talked about the power of the tongue, and he began his dialogue with a warning. He said, "Not many of you should become teachers, because you know that you will receive a stricter judgment." See, apparently, the recipients of James's letter, they also had a longing to educate others about what they thought. And James tells them, he says, you better be careful with that. There is a danger in attempting to teach because it involves talking. And as Proverbs 10:19 says, when there are many words, sin is unavoidable. And so last time, James, he targeted our tendency as humans to want to talk and want to be heard. And this week, he follows that up by essentially asking the question, should you be heard? I mean, do you have wisdom that's worth listening to? I mean, just listen to James's opening question. He says, who is wise and has understanding among you? I mean, in other words, how many of you believe that you have an opinion that needs to be shared? How many of you feel like people need to hear your perspective on things? And James says, if this is you, then please step forward and let's put your wisdom on trial. Let's take it to the courtroom to determine if your claims about being wise are true. Now, as James describes to us what wisdom does and does not look like, I want you to consider the question that I've been reflecting on this week, and it's this. If you were charged with having wisdom, would you be convicted? I mean, would you be found guilty of living and speaking wisely? And obviously, to answer this question, we first need to clarify and remind ourselves of what James means by wisdom. And so if you remember from a few sessions back, we said, wisdom is the ability to see ourselves and our circumstances and other people in light of reality and eternity. In other words, it's the ability to see things from God's perspective. Wisdom is an outlook on life that leads to action. Your viewpoint and my viewpoint on life will guide our behavior. And seeing things God's way, it will lead to conduct that brings full life and peace. While looking at things any other way, it may involve some temporary pleasure, but it will eventually lead with disappointment and disorder. As it says in Proverbs 14:12, there is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way to death. And as we compare these two ways of seeing the world, I want to begin by describing what James says the road to disaster and disorder looks like. And he tells us it involves two things: bitter envy and selfish ambition. I mean, listen to how he puts it. He says, if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't brag and deny the truth, because such wisdom does not come from above, but it's earthly and it's unspiritual and it's demonic. For where envy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every kind of evil. It's fascinating to me that the test that James has created to evaluate our wisdom, it seems to just boil down to two simple questions. What are you pursuing, and where will it lead you? And these two questions strike at the very heart of envy and selfish ambition. I mean, let's start with bitter envy. Bitter envy, it's resentful it's resentful dissatisfaction with what you have because you want what someone else has. Have you ever felt this? I mean, I know I have. We can be envious of so many things like stuff and looks and abilities or somebody's personality or their life situation. I mean, I could go on. But regardless of what we're jealous of, the result is always the same. It's a joy stealer. It causes us to buy into the myth that the grass is always greener on the other side. When I was thinking about this, it took me back to my teaching days back in Texas. I had the awesome opportunity to work with one of my best buddies from college. We played soccer together and we were able to teach together and then coach together. And we even shared a classroom for a few years. This guy is amazing. He's incredibly charismatic and outgoing. He's great with words. He always knows what to say. He's genuinely transparent. He's like this people magnet. He just has a way of making those around him feel important and valued. And truth be told, I envied him so much. I looked at him and I thought, man, I am just a schmuck. I mean, compared to him, who am I? But then one day something happened that just blew my mind. We were doing some staff training and we were asked a question along the lines of, if you could change something about yourself, or if you could to be like something else or someone else, what would it look like? And as I listened to his answer, it sounded like he wanted to be more like me in certain ways. And I thought, what? Why in the world? But then I had what I can only consider like this eureka moment. Because sometimes we can be so focused on wanting what someone else has that we completely lose sight of the things we've been given. Envy is such a dangerous deception. It can keep us locked into this loop of discontentment. If I just had that, then I would be happy. And so we spend our lives just chasing things like a dog chases its tail. And we pursue and we obtain, but it doesn't satisfy. And so we go on to the next thing and we chase, but we never really go anywhere. And we just end up right back where we initially started, right? And then there's selfish ambition. Ambition that's self-centered. It creates this strong desire and determination in us to achieve something that's all about us. And here's the crazy thing about this mindset. The world applauds it. The world applauds this mentality, but James tells us that this is not a way of thinking that should be bragged about. Because you see, while envy, it traps us in this endless loop of discontentment, selfish ambition, it takes us on a journey that eventually leads to a dead end. And we, as people, we're often ambitious about a lot of things. I mean, we chase after notoriety and popularity and power and achievements and money. And again, we can go on and on. We buy in to the great lie that says, I'm at the center of everything. It's all about me. And while this may sound appealing, it's an illusion. It's like a mirage in the desert that it looks like a paradise, but it really just leads to dust. And I don't know your story, but I can tell you how I've seen this play out in my own life. So last week I shared how I struggled with my self-esteem all through junior high and high school, even to a degree still today. And I never felt good enough. And my strategy for overcoming this was to make a name for myself. You know, if I could just accomplish great things, then others would see that I was worthy of their affection. And so I attached my value to my performance, and this thought drove me in everything that I did, in the classroom and on the soccer field and in my walk with God even. I wanted to be the best so that I could prove to others that I was important, that I mattered. And yet, enough was never enough. I mean, because nothing I ever accomplished made me feel worthy or made me feel good enough. Honestly, it just led me back to envy. It caused me to constantly compete with and compare myself to others around me. Because you see, my sense of worth and my identity, they were linked to the achievements and the circumstances of other people. And it made it impossible for me to truly love them or celebrate their victories and joys, because I could only see them as threats to my own value. And that is no way to live, I can tell you. It's a dead-end street. First of all, because there's always someone who has more than you, whether it's more talent or money or fame or power. And secondly, these things don't last. And these attitudes of envy and selfish ambition just highlight our tendency as humans to make much of ourselves. We want to elevate ourselves to the place of God. And James says, this is not wisdom. It's not sustainable. It's only going to end badly. You see, when we live by our own rules and we place our personal happiness and glory as the greatest good in life, this just creates a world filled with chaos and disorder. Our society becomes filled with instability and corruption. I mean, why do we do this? Have you ever stopped to think about what motivates us to continually pursue things that just lead to envy and selfish ambition? Or once we obtain the things that we're chasing after, what causes our inexplicable need to just cling on to our worldly trinkets? Like, I've climbed my way to the top, but now I've got to look out for anyone who threatens to take it away from me. Or I've got this shiny new toy, but don't touch it, you'll mess it up. Or I've just achieved this incredible award, and so I'm hoping nobody does anything good to steal my spotlight. Or I can't let anyone see that there are places in my life that are just a complete mess because I have an image to maintain. Heaven forbid they know I'm human. Or that person just wronged me, and so I'm going to show them, forget mercy. I'm going to hold on to unforgiveness. That'll teach them. I believe that the road that leads to hell is much different than we often think. So often I hear how evil it is for God to send people to hell, but instead I think hell comes as a result of our intense desire to just cling on to the very things that enslave us. I mean, it's our stubborn refusal to let them go that eventually leads to just an emptiness and a darkness of the soul. And all of this stems from our inability to properly perceive and distinguish the path of disorder from the road to real joy. When Jesus came on the scene, he had the audacity to say, things don't have to be this way. I mean, he basically told people, your life doesn't have to be run by jealousy or anger or the comparison trap, that things can be different. You can live free from all this worldly baggage. You see, the message of the gospel is not a mandate. It's an invitation. an invitation into a better way of living, an invitation into genuine fulfillment and a life of peace where you and I are free to love and enjoy the blessings of God and also celebrate the victories and the joys of others, because our identity and worth, it's not found in what the world thinks or says about us, but what God thinks and says about us. I mean, this is the way of wisdom. This is how James describes it. Listen to what he says. The wisdom from above, it's first pure and then peace-loving, gentle and compliant and full of mercy and good fruits, without favoritism or hypocrisy. I mean, these are all the things that James has been talking about up to this point, right? Imagine if we lived this way. Think about the peace that we would experience, that our world would experience. And this is what James tells us. He says that the fruit of righteousness, it's sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. On the spectrum of heavenly wisdom and worldly foolishness, where are you? Are you living wisely? Or are there areas of your life where you have a death grip on things that are only going to eventually lead to darkness? The invitation for a better way of life, it still stands. The question is, will you choose it? Because you see, the road to real peace and real joy is found when you and I submit our wills to God and pursue Him and seek after hearts that are more and more like His.